The 17th BRICS Summit entered its second day in Rio de Janeiro. Key discussions centered on climate action, including COP30 preparations and global health.
Because the tariffs and how they impact on the global economy, and it's important for us to deal with the issue of the tariffs.
The BRICS Summit 2025 is shaping up to be a game changer, especially for Africa. With the bloc expanding and reform high on the agenda, African nations are stepping into the spotlight, pushing for fairer global governance and deeper South-South cooperation. From trade to tech, the opportunities are massive. This year's summit could redefine Africa's role in a shifting world order. This story was first originally reported by peoplesdispatch.org News. So, what's at stake? And how can Africa turn presence into power? Let's dive into the key takeaways from this pivotal moment. Strengthening economic partnerships. The BRICS Summit 2025 has ignited renewed optimism about Africa's economic future, setting the stage for game-changing partnerships. At this year's gathering in South Africa, attendees celebrated the continent's 4.5% projected GDP growth in 2025, well above the global average. Those stats signals real momentum, with the continent's expanding middle class fueling demand for goods, services, and investment. Brazil's agritech firms are partnering with Kenyan cooperatives to boost food security, while Russia's energy giants are entering Ghana's gas-rich offshore zones. These collaborations aren't just transactional, they're transformational, anchoring long-term growth. China's President Xi Jinping emphasized at the summit that Africa's development is central to building a multipolar world. His pledge of $20 billion in infrastructure loans underscores this commitment, reinforcing rail, ports, and digital corridors across the Sahel and East Africa. Meanwhile, India launched a Pan-African digital skills initiative that aims to train 1 million young Africans in coding and fintech by 2026. That's not just a headline, it's job creation, tech diversification, and economic resilience in motion. South Africa's own industries are scaling up to supply automotive parts to Brazilian and Chinese automakers setting up shop across northern Africa. The cumulative effect? A web of interlinked value chains that elevate Africa from resource exporter to regional manufacturing and tech hub. Reform of BRICS governance, giving developing nation members like Egypt and Nigeria more voting power, will turbocharge these efforts. It means decisions, funds, and projects reflect African realities, not just distant priorities. The bottom line, this summit is equipping Africa with financial muscle and strategic alliances, a launchpad for economic transformation that goes beyond aid into equity and ownership. It's exactly that shift from charity to partnership that defines this historic moment. Institutional reform and inclusive governance. Institutional reform emerged as a cornerstone of the BRICS 2025 agenda, with Africa driving calls for more inclusive governance. Historically, major decisions within the bloc favored founding members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, often sidelining perspectives from newer members like Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. At this summit, leaders endorsed a progressive mechanism to recalibrate voting structures. Under the new framework, any member representing at least 5% of BRICS GDP or 5% of its trade volume secures additional seats on key committees. This means that next year, Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, will officially join the Economic Coordination Council. Egypt and Kenya will gain seats on the Infrastructure and Development Board. These changes aim to democratize funding decisions and project priorities. The African Development Bank-backed report predicts this shift will increase the continent's BRICS allocated budget by 20% by 2027. That equates to roughly $15 billion in additional funding for critical sectors: healthcare, education, clean energy, tailored to African needs. This is not token representation, it's structural empowerment. Transparency is also on the agenda. BRICS will launch a unified project tracking portal, offering real-time reporting on expense allocations, timelines, and impact assessments. Civil society groups from Accra to Cape Town will have seats on oversight committees, adding integrity to the system. This insurgent move towards shared governance is a direct challenge to decades of top-down development models. It asserts that Africa isn't just a recipient, it's a full stakeholder with a voice, influence, and accountability. Infrastructure investment and connectivity. Infrastructure and connectivity dominate the BRICS 2025 action plan, and Africa stands to gain immensely. The summit unveiled a $50 billion Digital Silk initiative, co-financed by China, India, and Brazil, aiming to link key African cities via fiber networks, 5G deployments, and cross-border data hubs. This scheme aligns with China's President Xi's pledge that digital roads are the 21st century's new infra-highways. Regional connectivity will supercharge e-commerce, telemedicine, and universities delivering remote education, especially in rural regions where connectivity gaps have held back progress. Physically, the Trans-African Multimodal Corridor got a major boost, a proposed rail line connecting Lagos and Mombasa, supported by a $12 billion BRICS loan facility. This project is an upgrade to the continent's transport arteries, cutting freight transit time in half and drastically reducing logistics costs from around 25% of GDP to under 15%. Nigeria's vice president believes it will rewire Africa's economy by dramatically improving access to regional and global markets. On the energy front, Russia has agreed to finance the development of modular nuclear reactors in South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, with initial investments totaling $7 billion. These reactors are small-scale, safe, and specifically tailored to power industrial hubs and new tech parks. Additionally, solar corridor projects in the Sahara and Sahel will receive $8 billion in shared funding from BRICS members, building large-scale arrays and microgrids across 6 countries to bring reliable electricity to over 30 million people. Trade dynamics and market diversification. Trade dynamics took center stage at BRICS 2025, with a clear focus on reducing Africa's dependency on commodity markets and expanding value-added exports. Currently, roughly 70% of the continent's exports are raw materials, oil, copper, cocoa, with fluctuating prices that expose economies to volatility. This summit introduced a trade pact aimed at cutting tariffs on semi-finished goods and mutual non-tariff barriers among African BRICS partners. Over a decade, this is projected to stimulate $80 billion in intracontinental trade. India pledged to import $10 billion in processed African food products, coffee, cashews, and tropical fruits, creating supply chain stability and market access for smallholders. Brazil committed to purchasing $5 billion in African leather and textiles, offering structured demand channels for artisans and factories in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Morocco. South Africa announced seed financing for export processing zones, EPZs, in West and East Africa, backed by $1.5 billion in joint BRICS capital, with favorable terms to incubate local processing plants for agro and textiles. The pact also fosters services trade. Kenya and Nigeria will lead collaborative efforts to export fintech solutions and telehealth services to Brazil and India, leveraging young, tech-savvy talent. With an estimated 500 million smartphones across the continent, Africa's digitally native population is primed to serve remote markets. These measures chart a path toward diversification, higher value add, and more predictable foreign exchange flows. By prioritizing processing rather than just extraction, Africa begins to rewrite its trade narrative, with domestic industries generating more profit, jobs, and innovation than raw material exports ever could. The BRICS-backed trade framework is a pivotal step away from dependency, emphasizing resilience and self-determination. Through this pact, Africa embeds itself deeper in the global economy, not as a supplier of resources, but as a creator of goods and services. Technology transfer and green transition. Technology transfer and sustainability topped the summit's agenda, with a focused push to accelerate Africa's green transition. Global warming has hit the continent hardest, and African leaders demanded new tools for climate adaptation. In response, BRICS members rolled out an African Tech Accelerator Fund, backed by a combined $15 billion commitment. This fund will catalyze Africa-based research hubs in solar, battery storage, and climate-resilient agriculture. China's president emphasized how renewable technologies must go hand in hand with African innovation, ensuring localized solutions. Brazil committed $3 billion to establish bioenergy projects that convert agricultural waste into power, as showcased in São Paulo's own sugarcane-to-electricity plants. South Africa's renewable giants pledged a $2 billion joint venture to build 2 gigawatts of wind farms across the Cape to feed both local demand and regional grids. India announced an Africa-wide program to share its low-cost solar microgrid designs, with initial pilot sites in rural Nigeria, Senegal, and Uganda. These microgrids will bring stable electricity to nearly 20 million people in off-grid zones. Meanwhile, Russia pledged technology licensing for cold-resistant greenhouses to boost agriculture in the Horn of Africa, tackling food insecurity with minimal environmental footprint. BRICS further agreed to a Green Bonds Framework for Africa, with $10 billion in bond issuances facilitated through emerging African stock exchanges in Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Cairo. Proceeds from these bonds will be ring-fenced specifically for sustainable infrastructure and circular economy projects, global South solidarity, and political influence. Finally, the BRICS Summit 2025 reinforced a powerful theme: global South solidarity. This isn't just symbolic, it reflects concrete shifts in geopolitical influence. Africa, home to more than 1 billion people and 25% of UN member states, is moving from being a passive object of diplomacy to an active architect of global policy. During high-level discussions, leaders agreed that African states will co-author BRICS positions on reforming UN Security Council representation, pushing for permanent seats for Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt. By amplifying African voices on critical issues, climate justice, debt relief, digital rights, the bloc is redefining modern diplomacy. BRICS also unveiled a countermodel to Western-led institutions, a Global South Cooperation Council. This council, comprising 15 nations across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, will meet biannually to coordinate on trade policy, health systems resilience, and cumulative debt restructuring for middle-income countries. Over time, this network could rival Bretton Woods institutions in shape and reach. At the summit, South African President Ramaphosa described it as our answer to decades of marginalization. That's powerful framing. China's President Xi Jinping reiterated support for this solidarity model, highlighting how mutual respect and shared priorities can drive a multipolar era. Likewise, India's PM Narendra Modi emphasized that South-South alliances enhance negotiating strength on global platforms, from climate forums to trade talks. Africa gains leverage, credibility, and bargaining power. In practical terms, this could mean better terms for vaccine deals, tech licensing, and trade negotiations. It also signals a geopolitical realignment, from aid-dependent relationships to peer-driven partnerships. As the BRICS alliance grows stronger, Africa stands at a strategic crossroads, no longer a passive player, but an active shaper of global reform. With calls for a new economic order and greater multilateral equity, 2025 might just be Africa's breakout year within BRICS. The path won't be easy, but the potential is undeniable. Special thanks to peoplesdispatch.org News for highlighting this crucial story. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Could this summit redefine Africa's global standing once and for all?